Do you ever wonder what happened to your friends from high school? I mean, you were so close. You laughed together, you cried together, you shared some of the best years of your lives together. And yet, somehow through life, you just lost touch. Now it's time to relive those moments once again. Introducing the podcast that takes you back in time to the place where it all began. This is Class Reunion. We're bringing you all the gossip, secrets, and scandals from your high school days that you won't want to miss. Join us as we catch up with old classmates and dive into the wildest stories from our high school days. From those legendary parties to the infamous cliques, we're spilling all the tea on who's who and what really went down. So grab a seat, turn your volume up, and get ready for a trip down memory lane. Class Reunion, the podcast that reunites us all. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Class Reunion. I wanted to take us back in time. Memorial Weekend is coming up, and boy, did it bring back memories of what it was like in the 70s and early 80s when you planned for Memorial Weekend. And I know that, when I look back at this, I realize I'm from Michigan. So some of these references will be about lake time in Michigan, which there's nothing like it, but Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, I believe, in Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, anywhere where going to the lake, not the ocean, but a lake was the thrill of a lifetime over Memorial Weekend. And there just absolutely was nothing like it. I mean, it was the kickoff to summer. And I just remember loving Memorial Weekend versus Labor Day. I know Labor Day is great, but I looked at them as we were honoring our veterans for sure. And that always brought about some great parades, which I'll get into. But, Labor Day was the end of summer. It was always like this sad final weekend that you had to kind of get everything in before labor began and you went back to school. So for me personally, I loved Memorial Weekend, and there just was nothing like it. I know that seems kind of silly, but I just wanted to take a moment with this coming up and remember some of those, moments in our life when we were young and it was the 70s and we were getting ready to go up north. And so let's begin with just what it was like to even prep for the trip, to even set up for Memorial Weekend. If you were lucky enough, to have some type of pop-up camper, which was very bougie in my world, or even, a tent, it was just a cool thing to do the night before, where you knew everyone was prepping to go away. And you would either put up your tent in the backyard to kind of air it out, make sure you had any holes patched up, or your camper was aired out. But it was the thrill of before you even left the driveway to prep for everything. And you had to get your sandwiches ready and all the food that you would need, the hot dogs, hamburgers, the whole menu items that you were going to indulge upon for that long weekend. And in my case, and sometimes other people as well, you would put the bricks underneath the camper in the driveway, and we could sleep there the night before. It was like a special treat to sleep in the pop-up or in the tent before you even left. It just was so fun to do all of that the night before. Now, in our case, we had to pack 40 bologna sandwiches. I don't know why I felt like peanut butter and jelly was almost a nice change, because let's talk about it. BOLOGNA. We had bologna all the time. And I don't even know if you call it meat, but was thick and it was gross and it was hot in the car. It was just something that we stopped and ate on the rest areas on the way up. And it was a big debate because some of us liked ketchup and some of us liked mustard, and you could not convince one person one way or the other. If you had it wrong and you picked up the wrong sandwich, it was disgusting. Which is funny because I was a ketchup girl back in the day, but now if I had to eat bologna, I would pretend like it's a hot dog and I would have mustard. I don't know. But just that packing up the car and getting on the road was so fun. And we would have those highlighter books, with the yellow highlighter that had the answers. So you had these quiz books to keep you occupied on the way up. And you would use the highlighter to do the answers. That was always a lot of fun. You had to get the right position in the car and it was all based on seniority. So naturally, me being the youngest, I was always in the middle, in the back. Sometimes I sat in the well of the car, like, just the bottom floor of the car, which was hot and gross, but I sat there sometimes as well. We also had those books where you did a story and you filled in adjective, verb, noun, and you would read it back and you would laugh so hard because it was such a silly story. It was so dumb. But, you know, with your family, it was a moment in time where everybody was excited and, for the most part, getting along because you knew the fun that lied ahead, So you were all sort of, for the most part, on your best behavior until your parents said, "Don't make me get back there." And then you knew you're gonna get a whooping. But it was a lot of fun, and I loved the games that we had in the car and the license plate game. And for us, this is Michigan, but anybody who has a traffic jam of where you're gonna go up north, we had 75. I don't even think we had 96 at the time. We had M22, which took you to Leelanau Peninsula, and you sat. I mean, we always talk about Michigan being the home of orange barrels because it's always under construction. But I'm talking the 70s. There was like one way in, one way out, and patience was a virtue. And you all just had to sit there in a car, which oftentimes didn't have air conditioning. We had to roll down our windows, and you just stared out the window, and it wasn't bad. It was like a way to really sit back and see the state, and you felt like you were just going, like, it may have taken you 5, 6 hours to drive only something that was 2 hours away, but you felt like you were going into a whole nother state. And there is nothing like it. Speaking from Michigan, when you leave the city suburbs and then you start to see gravel roads and farmland and side of the road displays of fruits and vegetables and fireworks, and just, you knew, and cows, you just felt like, okay, I'm getting there. This is a whole nother world I don't see every day. And traffic jams weren't a problem. In fact, it kind of became fun because you paled up with a car next to you, and you kind of knew who was in their car because you were traveling together side by side for so long. So it was fun to see if it was a boy or a girl you had a crush on, or how many siblings were in that car, and what did they have packed. And it was pretty funny. If they had bikes in the car or on the back, that was incredibly cool. But I do remember you could actually stop, and many of us did, where we would pull over, like, let the kids out. Kids, mind you, because 18 and under, you could buy drinks, buy booze. And all these kids would go to the corner gas station and buy beer. And in many cases, like for us in Michigan, that was, Stroh's and Schlitz and Miller and Bud Light, but most of those were Michigan beers at the time. And cigarettes, because, you could write a note. We've talked about that before. You could write a note and go in and buy a pack of cigarettes as long as you had some kind of note from your parents, which, honestly, I mean, that was typical of my mom. She was a Virginia Slims menthol. I'll never forget the order. I still can't believe she smoked, but she did. We would go to Banned Drugs in Southfield, Michigan, and I'd get cigarettes with a letter and a Marathon candy bar and a People magazine. I don't know. That's what she wanted, or maybe it was like one of the gossip magazines, like Esquire or something like that. I don't know, or Star magazine. But you'd see these kids all get out of their cars and go up to this local gas station and come back to their parents' vehicle with a 12-pack of beer. It was hysterical. And then you just picked right back up because you weren't going anywhere. It was, solid traffic. But then it started to turn into the scenic routes where it was just, one road, and it was winding. And I don't know about you, but like, that's when my imagination would pick up, and I would pretend to live in every single cottage, every single town that I went through, because you went through a lot of tiny little towns, and it was just beautiful. And I always picked a cottage or a location and a lake that I thought was really cool. And I would say, I'm going to live there one day. But you just slowed down. And we've talked about it, no cell phones, but you also let your imagination go to a different level because that's all we had. I mean, today we can meditate or we can have quiet time. But when we were young and we were in the 70s, our imaginations were on fire. And I loved that. I mean, I created stories from start to finish for the whole weekend, and I just let myself go to another place. It was pretty awesome. And you could just gaze for a long time living up north, and it all just made sense. You could hear the sounds of music. In some cases, we had an NPR in the car a lot, but if you had like a Walkman or something like that, or somebody had a little transistor radio, you could hear the sounds, whether it was a campground or across the lake. Remember how still the lake was? You could hear the Eagles or Fleetwood Mac or Led Zeppelin playing, Rolling Stones. And for, us Michiganders, we loved like Bob Seger, Bruce Springsteen, Neil Young, Bob Dylan, James Taylor, because we had a lot of people that just, you would hear in the distance somebody picking up a guitar and playing around a campfire. I mean, nothing like the sounds and smells of up north. And you could just hear the stillness of the night. And I loved it. Like you didn't go to your neighbor's house and say, turn it down. It was familiar and it was there. You knew there was a house full of family and friends just trying to enjoy Memorial Weekend and kick it off. And nobody really complained. It was the sound of the weekend. And let's talk about, the smells. Like you knew when people were grilling, even if it was a campground or a lake, you could smell that charcoal and lighter fluid, which honestly, I mean, the smell of lighter fluid it does take me back. It takes me back to charcoal grills and also lighting the fire when it would blow up. And, if you had too many cocktails, that's how you started your campfires. But you just, those smells, you knew it was time for dinner. Everybody was getting prepped to have a huge meal, baked beans and corn and hamburgers and hot dogs. And then there was the potato salad. And I don't know, it just seemed to be like that was the staple of everybody's meal, and everyone had their own recipe. Everybody had a certain way their mom made it. And for me, I remember slicing the eggs, hard boiled eggs on the top, and she would splash a dash of paprika. And I mean, I thought she was on the Iron Chef. I mean, it looked beautiful and homemade. There was always a pie that you got from a local market. If cherries were in season, cherry pie was always a classic. And watermelon, watermelon was everywhere, morning, noon, and night. There was always a fresh, I can't even remember how many watermelons we would go through and slice up over the weekend. It was just the best menu you could have for a Memorial Day weekend. And then there was the cooler, like the really heavy, heavy old metal coolers that weren't all that great. I mean, we all had one, but they had more water in there than ice. And you knew you were always going to find a Verner's or a Fago Pop. I've converted to soda, but Fago Pop back in the day. And it was cherry and grape and orange and that pretend version of Sprite, like a lemon lime Fago. It's just, you knew you could walk out and lift that top of that heavy cooler and find something. Now, of course, it wasn't water because we had the hose for that, but pop was everywhere. And, you never went hungry Memorial Day weekend. It was just, no one was starving. That's for sure. There weren't any Blackstone grills or gas grills. It was just all charcoal and it was awesome. And then if you were lucky to be in a small town area or on a lot of times the campgrounds, you went for the Memorial Day parade. And it was just really cute little towns where they'd have these parades and you'd go sit right on the curb and you dangle your feet right in the street. And I just loved looking at all the homes that had tiny little front porches with those red, white, and blue banners. hanging. It was all patriotic. And I thought, my gosh, these people live in the coolest place ever, that they have this parade right outside their door. Like, how cool is that? Not realizing maybe how lonely and quiet it is outside of the summer months. But I wanted to live in every small town that I went to with a parade. It was just very, very fun. You get your blankets and your chairs, and you saw the veterans come by, and you knew that everybody in the town knew who they were and was supporting and applauding them. It was incredibly cool. And it's weird because for me, parades today are sort of a weird trigger. Like, I love them, but I know that they're so risky. And whether it's intentional or not, you either have people that do intentionally run over crowds. We've seen and heard that, or accidental because a car gets out of control. Like, I would never let my kids sit on the curb now and dangle their feet in the street because it's become, sort of a dangerous tradition. And back in the 70's, it was just awesome. It was a classic, and knock on wood, we were fortunate to not have situations like that happen. We just had our little flags that we carried, and you had your jean shorts on and your white shirt. If you had a flag on there, I don't know. We didn't have Old Navy back then, but we all had some cool summer outfits that we were excited to wear because we didn't care how cold it was or if it was raining. We were going to wear our pre-summer attire. And then it was just a lot of fun. And then you would head back to, the campground or a cottage, and we as kids were allowed to have lighters and matches, and we would do our own fireworks. Of course, it was tame, like sparklers and things. But remember when you had like those snakes, the little black disc that you put on the cement, and they would make all of these burn into these little rows of snakes, and you had that smell, you knew it was coming, and you always felt like, or at least I did, like some kind of pyro, if it made a mark on the cement and made a black mark, like, ooh, I've really caused damage to the cement by lighting these snakes up. But we carried matches and lighters. That's just a big lighter was not a thing that was unusual for us to carry in our back pockets back in the day. And it was mostly because our parents wanted to have fun. I mean, they were litty up north. They were different parents up north. Didn't matter what you were happening at home. When we all got up north, it was like this fair game of everybody out to have a great time. And whether they were there with family in a family lake house and cottage, or neighbors that came up to join, alcohol was flowing. I mean, they really laughed, chilled out, had a great time, were up late. I mean, it was not uncommon for them to be out as late as the kids were. I just really wanted to chill out and have a good time, which made it easy for us to sneak out because when they did go to bed, it was more like they were passing out. And it was so easy for everybody to get off their little bunk beds or out of their sleeping bags and explore the campground or the lake because, they were done. They were done supervising, and they just were hoping that you were smart enough to get out of the jam if you were in one. It's just so, so fun. But let's talk about the stars at night. There was nothing better than heading to the end of the dock, and you heard the water lap up on the shoreline, and you looked up and saw, like, you could reach out and touch the stars. If it was a clear night, there was nothing as magical as a Michigan up north starlit sky. And although I could only really identify the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, I felt like I could see Capricorn and all the other star constellations. I just made up things. There wasn't an app to tell you what it was. You just used your imagination and made shapes and stories with all the stars in the sky. And it was always at the end of the dock, and you could smell the fireflies, and you could catch them in a glass jar. I don't know. I think Michigan's the only one that really calls them fireflies. I think there's different names for everyone else, but you get them in a glass jar and have them in the house or your camper and light them up. They would light up all through the night. It was just magical. There just wasn't anything like it. And Mosquitoes, yeah. I mean, we had them. It was almost like a rite of passage. I don't even know if we had mosquito repellent back in the day. I do remember some places had the killer, thing that would electrocute them because it was so loud. But I don't know that we had off or I mean, I think we did, but I'm sure it was loaded with DEET and bad chemicals. It never really stopped me from getting eaten. So I don't even know how bad those pesticide cans were. But that was part of the fun was the mosquito bites, it didn't matter. And then if you were lucky enough, you could water ski. If you had somebody that had a boat, just the whole day would be water skiing. And it wasn't so much like to be super fancy and skillful. It was making sure that everybody on the boat had a turn to learn or try. I mean, sure, some of the kids who had been up to the cottages year after year were, very good, but it was like they took the turn to show other kids who had never had the opportunity to go water skiing what it was like and how to get started and hold the rope. And if you fell, they just turned back around and, you tried as long as you could. And the goal was to leave that weekend, making sure everybody knew how to water ski. I mean, it was super friendly and, uh, welcoming, I remember. And you would then pick up a game of, frisbee, volleyball, horseshoes. It really didn't matter. And if you were in a campground, even for example, or yeah, I mean, you were friends with everybody on that campground by the time the weekend was over. And it was weird how we felt like if we met somebody, from Cadillac, Michigan, that we met somebody that was basically out of state because we just, we're never going to see each other again. We lived so far apart, but you had the best weekend connecting and playing games with people that you just didn't even know. And the crushes were rampant. Like you could immediately have a summer weekend crush that you thought would last a lifetime. When you found a boy or a girl that you thought was cute, it was just instant, and it was even more fun if it was somebody that was from such a different part of where you were growing up that you just thought, man, I'm in love with a farmer. Like I don't know, it was just super fun. And you just played, and I don't remember anybody talking politics or race, religion, sexuality. It was just, we were all out to have a really good time. And it's not to say that, you know, it was that far fetched to meet people from different places, but this is the 70s. I mean, not everybody was on a plane and not everybody traveled. So if you did meet people from a different area, it was feeling like it was New Orleans or Louisiana, it might have been, like Traverse City, someone from Traverse City. Oh my gosh. Just very, very cool. And I loved how quickly you fell in love back at that time. And if you held hands, you just remembered it like it took carried you through the whole summer. It was amazing, and if you had a friend with you, there was always somebody for everybody. Seemed like there was always room to go around with everybody. And like I said, the weather didn't matter. I mean, if it was cold, it didn't matter. If you had rain on your tent, was kind of the thrill of like, is it going to leak? I mean, you just kind of scooched your sleeping bag to the middle of the tent, and the corners were always a little wet and damp, but that's how you spent the whole weekend. It didn't matter. You had, at least in our household, we had duct tape, and you just patched it up and hoped that the next time there was a rainfall, it wasn't going to come in. But there was always mildew and water in our tent and that musty smell. And shoot, that just meant you were camping. It just was part of the whole process. There was a time when I went to Silver Lake, and in Michigan, we have the sand dunes, and they're incredible. They're gorgeous. You need to have your heart checked to be able to walk down and then be able to walk back up, because there's a sign that says we will not come rescue. Or if they do, there's a big fine. But in the 70s, I don't even think there were signs. I think it was just kind of like, good luck. But in Silver Lake, they were a little bit smaller and manageable to walk and ride around. And there was a Yogi Bear campground that I took my son to. And they were soliciting for people to walk in the morning parade to wake everybody up in the campground. This woman came up to me and said, would you want to do it? So of course, I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I get in this costume. There's Yogi Bear, and was she called Mama Bear? I can't remember, but the mom, and then Boo Boo Bear. And obviously, because I'm short anyways, I was asked to be Boo Boo Bear. And I get in this costume. I show up at 6 o'clock. We're walking through this campground, waving to everybody. And the camp advisors are telling me, like, wave to your left and wave to your right. And all these kids were screaming with excitement. And the parents were making eggs and pancakes, like having coffee with the percolators. It was awesome. And I thought, okay, just concentrate, watch your feet. I kept trying to look down and focus on the person in front of you because I couldn't see where squat. And I had hair in my eye and I started to sweat. And you know what that's like when it's salt, like it starts to burn your eyes when you start to sweat. I finally get to the end of the parade and I'm like, okay, I've done my Yogi Bear due diligence here. I've volunteered my time. And then they said, we're going to go under a umbrella and we're going to start signing autographs. Now I'm wearing a mitten. Like Yogi Bear doesn't have, or Boo Boo Bear doesn't have fingers. It was a mitten, an actual mitten. And she sticks this big, huge black Sharpie in my hand. And I have a bunch of index cards in front of me. Now, mind you, I'm so soaking wet at this point. And she says, just put down Boo Boo Bear. So these kids are lining up for my autograph that I'm writing with a mitten and a pen. And she said, can you make them more lively, like friendly? I said, what? I couldn't say what because she kept saying, don't speak, which if you've listened to me, I have a hard time not speaking. So, she just kept saying, don't talk, but just make it friendlier. So I came up with this plan to put 2 eyes and a smiley face in all of the O's for Boo Boo Bear. But that's 4 O's per note card as I'm signing these things. And she's like, oh, that's great. And I thought, yeah, you won't do this. I mean, it was another hour of torture and standing in line and letting people take my photo. It was crazy. So at the end, I finally go into the trailer to get rid of my costume and I'm unzipping. And I mean, good thing is I probably dropped 10 pounds that day, but I'm getting out of this costume. I'm soaking wet. I take the helmet off because it was like a big football helmet covered in fur. And she simply just does a pass of Febreze, like a pass, not even inside the helmet, and puts it back on the shelf. And I was like, oh my God, I need to sterilize myself because this hasn't been cleaned from one person to the next. And we're all hot and sweaty. This can't be real. Just crazy. But back to the sand dunes, because they're so gorgeous. We did a Jeep ride and we rode our Jeeps all the way to the top and we lined up in a row and we were all in reverse. And we were all connected by the radio. So we had an instructor tell us what to do through the radio and a headset. And the guide said, okay, car number 1, which was me, you're going to just let off the gas, put it in reverse, and let the Jeep do all the work and go down backwards so you can create a spider leg. Now, Joe is tiny. I'm looking at Joe. I'm scared to death. And the woman next to me has a baby in a car seat. She's looking at me like, this is a double murder. Like, we're going to kill our children, but we're at the top. We don't know what to do. So I'm the first one to go. And he said, on the count of 3, release. And release I did. I released the loudest scream. Jesus heard me. I mean, there's just no way I didn't sound like I was at the end of my life. I go all the way down to the bottom of the hill and I can just hear this pause and then filled with all this laughter over the radio of people making fun of me. But, I was the first to go. So they were all waiting to see if I was going to flip or if I was going to survive. So they were allowed to laugh at me, but man, going first was not fun. But the sand dunes and if anybody's been to Silver Lake, you know how much fun that is. It was just a great experience. And that goes back to, you really do the best you can to have the best time up north. And I've been all over. I mean, people can chime in where they've been, but I've done Charlevoix, like I said, Silver Lake, Crystal Lake, Right by Beulah is a beautiful area. Houghton Lake, Higgins Lake, Torch Lake is huge. They always had a big fireworks display over Memorial Weekend, and it was just gorgeous. People also went to the Bad Axe area, which is up in the Thumb region. As we all know, we talk about Michigan like it's a mitten, but it is a beautiful area up there, which we call the Thumb region. Irish Hills, just so many beautiful things. And just conversations with your siblings. Like, you ended up having a different relationship when you were away. Now, when you came home, you went back and you continued to hate each other. But for some reason, they were your ride or die, and you experimented and had fun and went past the boundaries of what you were normally allowed to do. And it was sneaky and fun, and you laughed your asses off. And it was really, really fun. And if you brought a friend, that was even better, if you were allowed to bring a friend along. But nobody really cared about where you were or what you were doing, as long as you were having a good time. And no one was, thinking something was going to happen, knock on wood, thank God. But there just was nothing like it. And, you had your ice cream, your soft serve that you went to. We found a lot of dollar movie theaters in the, small towns, and we'd go see films that we probably saw 100 times, but it was so fun to take your quarters and go. I just want you to enjoy this Memorial Weekend. Try to go back in time and tell some stories with your kids or your neighbors and friends, and reminisce about the sounds of Memorial Day when you were in the 70s and 80s, and the blow pops and the orange push-up creamsicles that we had. It was all such a classic time. And so I wish my beloved state of Michigan a happy Memorial Weekend, and I'm sending a big hug to the mitten. So enjoy this weekend, and I look forward to next time on Class Reunion. Stay safe. All right, friends, that's it for this episode of Class Reunion Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show, write us a review, and share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.